This video is about the book of Matthew, chapter 25, specifically that quote you often hear from verse 40 or verse 45 of chapter 25. Verse 40 states, and Jesus is speaking here, quote, "Whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me," end quote. Or the slight variation of this in verse 45. It's quoted here on this slide, and that is, quote, "Whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do for me," end quote. Verse 45 is just stating verse 40 in a more negative tone. Jesus stating this concept twice in both a direct way, then rephrasing it in a negative tone, serves to emphasize what he is saying. So, what's to explain, you might ask? Well, I'm here to tell you that your current understanding of what the meaning of these verses of Matthew 25 is actually is quite incorrect. These verses are about much, much more and something different than what you think. You will find their true meaning explained in this video quite amazing. Many Christians have come to believe these verses 40 and 45 refer to how Jesus' followers failed or could fail Jesus if they do not help the poor and downtrodden. Many times I've heard people, especially political pundits, condemn actions by some other persons, groups, or government agencies which did or could adversely affect the poor, minorities, or others in need, such as those who have disabilities or health problems, for instance. They'll say that this or that group are not abiding by the words of Jesus when he said, quote, "Whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, the poor, minorities, downtrodden, etc., you did not do for me," end quote. This is not the correct meaning of this, at least not fully correct, and this interpretation of the verse is not really fully consistent with the context of verses 31 through 46. Well, to be honest, these words of Jesus do warn his followers to be supportive of the poor and those in need. It's just that there is a lot more to these verses than most people know about. It is important, and I feel compelled to try to make people aware of the full story. The truth is that these verses are a prophecy of the coming of the returned Messiah and his followers at a time in the world's future, that is, the future from the time that Jesus spoke these words. This prophecy is foretelling how he, the returned Christ Spirit, and his followers would be treated when he appeared in the latter days. And it is, expressly, a warning to the Christians of the future, not his followers in Jesus' day, but rather at a later time of his, the Christ's, return, his second advent. The warning being to not persecute and ill-treat him, the returned Christ, in his new guise as the new Messiah of the latter days, or persecute or ill-treat his followers at that time, who Jesus is saying will be the least of these. Jesus the Christ is also telling his followers of the future when he returns that he will return as a thief in the night, meaning as another human being, not the Jesus of the past, at least to outward appearance, meaning only the spiritually enlightened and sensitive will recognize him as the returned Messiah when he appears. And a warning to his many followers, seemingly good Christians, that many will deny his divine identity in the future, just as most Jews did in Jesus' time, denied his being the Messiah of the first advent, if they are not careful and spiritually aware. Remember, the New Testament states in several verses that the Christ would return as a thief or as a thief in the night, meaning he would be hidden and not easily recognized. This list is of the verses in which it is foretold that when the Messiah returns, meaning the return of the Christ, which is the Greek term for the Jewish term Messiah. They are in the book of Luke, chapter 12, in Matthew chapter 24, in Revelation chapter 3 and also in chapter 16, in 1 Thessalonians, and in 2 Peter. The Bible also states that the returned Messiah, meaning the Messiah of the latter days, would have a new name when he appears. Some examples of this in the book of Isaiah chapter 65, verse 15, speaking of the latter days, it states, quote, "The Lord God shall call his servants by another name," end quote. And in the New Testament, in the book of Revelation, Jesus is speaking here in both these verses. In chapter 2, verse 17, quote, "To him that overcometh will I give to eat of the hidden manna, and will give him a white stone, and in that stone a new name written, which no man knoweth saving he that receiveth it," end quote. And just as Christians took their name from their manifestation of God, Jesus the Christ, the followers of the new Messiah of the latter days will have a new name taken from the new name of the new Messiah. And in chapter 3, verse 12, quote, "And I will write upon him that overcometh, my new name," end quote. Again reinforcing the prophecy that the followers of the returned Christ would have a new name, because the returned Messiah of the second advent, the Messiah of the latter days, would have a new name. Now, I know you are very skeptical so far, so let's review the actual verses of Matthew chapter 25, verses 31 through 46 to prove what I'm saying. And don't worry, it's only 15 verses. A little background here about chapter 25 of Matthew. It has 3 sections. The third section is the one that is the prophecy we are discussing here. To highlight that third section, the section the video is about, I've singled it out here. Different translations or versions of Matthew title this section differently, or don't have a title to it at all. 3 of these titles are from first the New International Version, second the New King James Version, and third the New American Standard Bible. They're shown here. These titles are the sheep and the goats, then the Son of Man will judge the nations, and the judgment, respectively. All speak to this third section of Matthew 25 as being about God's judgment of humanity. In numerous books of both the Old and New Testaments, God or his prophets speak of God separating his sheep from the goats, or the wheat from the chaff, or other such metaphors for the judgment of humankind. You will see that the very last verse of Matthew 25, verse 46, mentions that those who are judged will either, quote, "go away to eternal punishment, but the righteous to eternal life," end quote. Now I'll review all the verses of this third section, verses 31 through 46. I'm using the New International Version of Matthew here, so the title of the third section is "The Sheep and the Goats." Note that I've added some bold and underlined words and phrases for emphasis. Quote, "When the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, he will sit on his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate the people one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will put the sheep on his right, and the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, 'Come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me.' Then the righteous will answer him, 'Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you?' The king will reply, Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. Then he will say to those on his left, Depart from me, you who are cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not invite me in. I needed clothes, and you did not clothe me. I was sick and in prison, and you did not look after me. They also will answer, Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty, or a stranger, or needing clothes, or sick, or in prison, and did not help you? He will reply, Truly I tell you, whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do for me. Then they will go away to eternal punishment, but the righteous to eternal life. End of quote and end of chapter 25. Now I'll go through these verses again to highlight and explain their meanings. One clear tell that this whole third section of Matthew 25 is a prophecy is that the future tense of the verbs are used throughout it, such as will be gathered, will separate the people, will say, will answer him, will reply, will go, etc. Keep note of the verb tense as we review these verses again as I highlight key parts of this prophecy. The very first verse of this section, verse 31, gives the very first indication, the most clear indication that this indeed is a prophecy. Quote, When the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, he will sit on his glorious throne. End quote. The phrase, when the Son of Man comes in his glory, well, this is directly stating that whatever follows this phrase in the text is about when the Messiah, the Son of Man, returns in the future, accompanied by angels, etc., meaning it's a prophecy of the latter days when the Messiah is to come in his glory. The next verse, quote, all the nations will be gathered before him, end quote. The meaning here is that the Messiah of the future will be sent for all humankind. His revelation will not be for just a small portion of humanity, not just for one area of the world, and not for people of just one religious background, such as just for Christians. The new Messiah, who Jesus himself is foretelling here, will be bringing a new revelation for the entirety of humankind for the next spiritual age. Keep in mind that these are the words of Jesus. The entirety of verses 31 through 46 are the words of Jesus. They would be in red letters in a red letter edition of the Bible, showing Jesus' words in red text. To continue, quote, and he will separate the people one from another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will put the sheep on his right and the goats on his left, end quote. The new Messiah is the one who separates the sheep from the goats per God's decree. The Messiah will put the sheep, that is, the good people, meaning those who follow God's new Messiah and his new revelation, to his right side, and puts the goats, the bad people, those who deny the new Messiah, to his left. Remember, this is about the separation of people by the new Messiah, and this is symbolized by comparing the judgment of people to how a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. The Bible uses at least two different metaphors for God judging humanity when the Messiah comes. Here is one from the Old Testament, from Ezekiel chapter 34, verse 17, quote, As for you, my flock, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I will judge between one sheep and another, and between rams and goats, end quote. Then in the book of Luke, chapter 3, verses 16 and 17, John the Baptist is speaking here in reply to people who asked him if he, John, was the Messiah. Quote, But one who is more powerful than I will come, the straps of whose sandals I am not worthy to untie. He will baptize you with the Holy Spirit and fire. His winnowing fork is in his hand to clear his threshing floor and to gather the wheat into his barn. But he will burn up the chaff with unquenchable fire. End quote. Chaff is the waste after the wheat grain. The grain is in the upper right of the photo, by the way, has been separated from the stems and other parts of the wheat, shown in the bottom left of the photo. Again, a reference to defining people by whether they recognize and obey the Messiah or those who do not. Moving on to verse 34 of Matthew 25. Quote, "Then the king will say to those on his right, that is the sheep, 'Come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world.'" End quote. The king spoken of here is the King of Kings, meaning the returned Messiah, the Messiah of the latter days, who Jesus foretold is coming at the end of the age, meaning at the start of a new age. So the sheep are put on the right side of the Messiah on his throne, and they are referred to here as blessed by my Father. It will be those deemed to be his sheep, meaning the followers of the new Messiah, who will claim their inheritance, which is the kingdom of God. This is the Messiah of the latter days, so his kingdom will be on earth as it is in heaven, promised for the 7th millennium. The Messiah tells his sheep to take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. This means that God has planned this from the very start of the world. By the way, this fruit is produced in the latter days, meaning starting about 400 years before the start of the 7th millennium. If you want to know more about this, see my video titled The Prophecy of the 7th Millennium on my YouTube channel named Integral Destiny 9, all one word with the number 9 at the end. That's Integral Destiny 9, all one word with the number 9 at the end. On to verse 35, quote, "For I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you invited me in. I needed clothes and you clothed me. I was sick and you looked after me. I was in prison and you came to visit me." End quote. Who is the I in these verses? It is obviously the Messiah to come, the Messiah of the latter days in the future. And he is describing here how he will be treated by people who are truly following the teaching of Jesus Christ in the future when the new Messiah appears. Meaning that the Messiah would be hungry and thirsty. He would be a stranger to them at some time or times in his life. He'd also be imprisoned and sick, needing care. These verses are telling God's sheep in the future that they would reveal themselves, that is, reveal their spiritual attributes, by helping this new Messiah, even if they didn't recognize him as the returned Messiah. Their actions would determine whether they would be considered to be God's sheep or goats. These verses are also telling us that the Messiah would appear in an unexpected place, time, and among unaccepting people. That's why he is hungry, thirsty, needing clothing, etc. As noted, some people, God's sheep, would help him, but obviously many people would not assist him. Moving along to verse 37, quote, "Then the righteous, the sheep, will answer him, saying, 'Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you?'" End quote. First, notice that the verb is future tense. The righteous, the sheep, will answer him, meaning that they will answer the future returned Messiah, the Messiah of the latter days. These three verses, 37 through 39, are warning those who want to be God's sheep in the future to watch for these events in the life of the Messiah, to first show their devotion and that they are God's sheep by taking care of anyone who suffers in such ways, hunger, thirst, illness, a stranger among them, etc. And second, to help these sheep recognize their new Messiah. The new Messiah will suffer from these conditions and others when he appears. His sheep will have some points of reference to determine who is and who is not the Messiah by seeking out knowledge about whether he fulfilled any of these prophecies or not. Verse 40, quote, "The king will reply, 'Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me.'" End quote. Remember, the king is the new Messiah. He will reply, for future tense, to his future followers, forewarning those who want to be true followers of God and the new Messiah, that these types of actions, caring for the hungry, the thirsty, the ill, etc., are the traits of a true believer. Verse 41, the Messiah addresses those placed on his left, the goats. Quote, "Then he will say to those on his left, 'Depart from me, you who are cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels.'" End quote. A definite change of tone here, obviously. If the Messiah determines that someone is a goat, that will classify that person as being outside of the good pleasure of God and the new Messiah because of the way they treat the Messiah and his followers. And Jesus goes on to say how these people will deserve to be classified as a goat. Quote, "For I was hungry, and you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not invite me in. I needed clothes, and you did not clothe me. I was sick and in prison, and you did not look after me." End quote. They also will answer, "Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or needing clothes or sick or in prison and did not help you?" He will reply, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do for me." Then they will go away to eternal punishment, but the righteous to eternal life. End of quote, and end of chapter 25. To reiterate, once again, the Messiah is the one who separates the sheep from the goats per God's decree. The Messiah will put the sheep, the good people, to his right side and puts the goats, the bad people, to his left. What is good and what is bad? Goats are those people who will not exhibit the generous behaviors that the sheep do, especially towards the Messiah and his followers when he appears in the world. And the sheep will be those people who have the described good attributes that God and his Messiah defined in this chapter, meaning they'll be generous, giving, accepting of the stranger, especially meaning the Messiah, and would take care of him when he's sick and visit him when he's in prison. Remember, this is about the separation of people by the new Messiah, and this is symbolized by comparing the judgment of people to how a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. But I have a real shocker for you at this point, my dears. Get ready. The Messiah of the latter days has already been here and gone, like a thief in the night that Jesus said he'd be. And the book of Matthew, chapter 25, verses 31 through 46 have all been fulfilled. Next, I'll tell you exactly how they were fulfilled. But a little background information first. You might ask, who were these two divine figures who have been anticipated so feverishly for so long by so many people? First, the forerunner, the Elijah figure foretold in the Bible, who appeared before the Messiah to announce his coming, just as foretold in the Bible. He was called the Gate. He was born in 1819 and was martyred for his teachings in 1850. He proclaimed his identity and purpose in the year 1844 and taught his message from God until his martyrdom in 1850. He announced that one greater than he would shortly appear. Now, the Messiah's divine name is the glory of God. And when I say divine name, just think of the term Christ as being the divine name of Jesus, and you will better understand. The new Messiah of the latter days was born in 1817 and passed on to the heavenly realm in 1892. He is buried in Palestine, as it was called at the time of his passing in 1892. It is now known as Israel, the Holy Land to several faiths. The glory of God revealed his divine identity and purpose in the year 1863. Now the gate, that Elijah figure I mentioned, is referred to as the Bab. That's the Persian language translation of the gate or door. The translation for the Messiah's divine name, the glory of God, is Baha'u'llah. Just for your information, their faith, the Baha'i faith, is spread all over the globe by this year 2018, some 174 years after its birth in 1844. There are now about 6 million Baha'is in the world and over 200 nations and territories on the planet. Now I'll review a brief history of the appearance of the new Messiah, Baha'u'llah. As you listen to this brief history of the new Messiah, keep special note of occurrences that fulfilled this chapter 25 prophecy revealed by Jesus in the book of Matthew about what the Messiah of the future would experience. Here again is that list of the experiences of the Messiah being foretold in this prophecy to keep in mind as his story unfolds. He would be hungry, thirsty, and needing clothing. He would be at some time or times be a stranger in a strange land needing shelter. He would be sick in need of care. He would be imprisoned. And as noted, some people, God's sheep, would help him, but obviously many people would not assist him, the goats. Baha'u'llah, the new Messiah, was born in 1817 in Tehran, Persia, where you see the red arrow pointing on the right of this map. Baha'u'llah became aware of the teachings of the Bab, that is his forerunner, the John the Baptist kind of person who foretold his coming. So he became aware of the Bab's teachings after 1844 when the Bab proclaimed his mission. But Baha'u'llah was not yet aware of his own spiritual identity or mission. He became an ardent follower of the Bab, in fact a disciple of the Bab, although he never physically met him. The Bab, the forerunner, was imprisoned by the Persian government for the most part of between 1848 through 1850, the year he was killed by the Persian government. After the Bab's death, the government conducted great persecutions of the Babis, the Babis are the followers of the Bab. Baha'u'llah himself was imprisoned in the infamous Black Pit prison in Tehran for 4 months from August 1852 through December 1852. His being the Messiah was revealed to him while he was in that prison. He did not tell anyone about this revelation from God for about 10 years thereafter. I should have prefaced this by stating that this map is of the Middle East during the period of time that the Bab and Baha'u'llah lived. Constantinople at the top, of course, is in the far northwest of present-day Turkey, and the arrow on this map right now is pointing to Baghdad, which we all know from recent unfortunate wars is in the present-day Iraq. So now you can kind of locate yourself on the map. Now back to our story. After Baha'u'llah was released from the Black Pit prison, the king banished him from Persia, sending him as a prisoner in exile to Baghdad. The red arrow is now pointing to Baghdad on this slide. Note that Baghdad is not in the Persian kingdom's territory, but rather was in the Ottoman Empire at this time. The Ottomans agreed to keep Baha'u'llah and many other of the Bab's followers contained in the area of Baghdad. Baha'u'llah was exiled to this area from early 1853 to May 1863. Of the 10 years or so that Baha'u'llah spent in what is present-day Iraq, there were about 2 years from April 1854 to March 1856 that he withdrew in solitary contemplation to the area of present-day northeastern Iraq, shown by the blue-shaded oval on this map. It is to the north of Baghdad in the Kurdish area of present-day Iraq. This area is called Sulaymaniya. Baha'u'llah lived on a mountain named Sargalu during this period of seclusion. After his 2 years of withdrawal to the mountains, Baha'u'llah returned to Baghdad in March of 1856 and became the de facto leader of the small community of Babis in the area, who were also exiled from their native land of Persia. Many Babis from Iran traveled to or Persia as it was known then, traveled to Baghdad to visit with Baha'u'llah because he was highly esteemed, and at that point one of the few disciples of the Bab left alive due to the deadly persecution of Babis by the Persian king, supported by the Muslim clergy. Then on April 22, 1863, just outside of Baghdad, Baha'u'llah made the first declaration to the Babi community of his identity as the person foretold by the Bab, the person that the Bab called him whom God would make manifest, meaning the foretold Messiah expected not only by the Babis, but also by Muslims, Jews, Christians, and other religious faiths. Yes, this means that Baha'u'llah is the Jewish Messiah of the latter days, the return of Christ expected by Christians and many Muslims, the foretold fifth Buddha, the Buddha Maitreya, the Buddha of universal fellowship, the 10th avatar expected by the Hindus, the Shah Bahram to the Zoroastrians, their promised world savior, among other expected saviors foretold in many other faiths. So Baha'u'llah is, all rolled into one divine entity, the divine luminary for all humanity in this new era of the spiritual evolution of the planet. Shortly after Baha'u'llah's declaration of his identity and mission, in the spring of 1863, at the request of the Persian government, Baha'u'llah and many of the Babis were exiled further away from Persia by the Ottoman Empire to try to put an end to the contact between the Baghdad Babis and the burgeoning Babi community in Persia. The Persian Shah and the government and the Muslim clergy were hoping that the infant Babi faith would die out. Baha'u'llah was exiled to Constantinople, the seat of the Ottoman Empire. He left Baghdad under escort by Ottoman troops on May 9, 1863. The very physically taxing trip, mostly over land, took about 3 months. Note that the city of Constantinople was later renamed Istanbul in 1930. The last leg of the journey to Constantinople was on board a steamship that the exiles were boarded onto at the Black Sea port of Samsun. Note the location of Samsun at the top center of the map. Baha'u'llah arrived in Constantinople in August 1863 and remained there for only about 4 months. Reports were that the Sultan, Abdul Aziz, apparently had thought Baha'u'llah was just some easily corrupted person, but quickly found out otherwise. The Sultan then, not being able to corrupt Baha'u'llah, exiled him, his family, and some companions out to Adrianople to try to remove Baha'u'llah as far away as possible from the Sultan's empire. Here you see the red arrow now pointing at Adrianople. Note that Adrianople was renamed Edirne, Turkey in 1928. Baha'u'llah, his family, and a few followers were isolated in Adrianople for about 4 years, from December 1863 through August 1868. Note that while Baha'u'llah was exiled to Adrianople, his life was threatened by his being poisoned. He nearly died from that event. He was left with a shaking hand from the effects of the poison for the remainder of his life. Baha'u'llah continued to draw people to him even in Adrianople. Many Persian Babis, now called Baha'is since they had accepted Baha'u'llah as being the one foretold by the Bab as coming, these followers of Baha'u'llah traveled far distances to try to visit him. The Sultan and his government leaders wanted to get him much further away, so they decided to banish Baha'u'llah and many of his followers to the prison city of Akka, Palestine, which was a province of the Ottoman Empire at the time. They were boarded as prisoners onto a steamship in Gallipoli on August 21, 1868, and began their journey over the Mediterranean Sea that ended on August 31, 1868, when they were deboarded in a tiny coastal town in Palestine named Haifa. That same day, they were put on a sailboat and taken across Haifa Bay to enter the prison city of Akka by means of the Sea Gate entrance. Baha'u'llah, his family, and a few companions were taken to the Citadel building, where they were imprisoned. Baha'u'llah and his innocent companions received very little food and terribly polluted water. All but a few quickly succumbed to typhoid and dysentery. Several died. On the left is a map that shows the Middle East area, and it shows the modern national boundaries, just to help you orient where you are, where we were talking about. Now note the small red square in the lower center of the map on the left. This area is further enlarged to the right so that you can see that this area is in northern Palestine, the area where Baha'u'llah and the early Baha'is were exiled. It was called Palestine at the time in 1868 when he arrived. Of course now it's in the nation of Israel. The large red arrow is pointing to the coastal walled city of Akka. Haifa, where Mount Carmel is located, is across the bay from Akka. The photo at the top is an old aerial photo of Akka, Palestine. This photo was probably taken around the time of World War I, maybe as late as World War II, when there were airplanes in the area. There actually were airplanes in the area in World War I. The green box at the top shows the Citadel building in Akka, which was a prison at the time. It is enlarged in the photo at the bottom. It was a prison at the time of Baha'u'llah, I should say. It's had many different purposes throughout its long history, but at the time of Baha'u'llah, it was used as a prison. Baha'u'llah, his family, and a few others were imprisoned in this building. These prisoners fell ill from typhoid and dysentery. Several died, as I mentioned before. The food was minimal and the water badly polluted and foul. Akka is an ancient city and was, at the time of Baha'u'llah, completely enclosed by walls. There were only two entrances into Akka, the land gate and the sea gate. This photo is of the sea gate through which Baha'u'llah, the King of Glory, entered into Akka, the strong city, for imprisonment as decreed by the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. This event was foretold in the Book of Psalms 24, verses 7 through 10, quote, "Lift up your heads, you gates, be lifted up, you ancient doors, that the King of Glory may come in. Who is this King of Glory? The Lord strong and mighty, the Lord mighty in battle. Lift up your heads, you gates, lift them up, you ancient doors, that the King of Glory may come in. Who is he, this King of Glory? The Lord Almighty, he is the King of Glory." End quote. So the Messiah of the latter days arrived in the Holy Land. From just this very short excerpt of a portion of Baha'u'llah's life, we can see that all those elements of the prophecy in Matthew 25 were fulfilled. He would be hungry, thirsty, and needing clothing. The Persian government confiscated all of Baha'u'llah's properties and assets before he was exiled from Persia to Baghdad. From his first imprisonment in the Black Pit prison in Tehran, he suffered from lack of food and water, especially clean water. He left the Black Pit prison with scant clothing on his back. Baha'u'llah was exiled as a prisoner from his native Persia to present-day Iraq area, a stranger in a strange land. But then he was exiled as a prisoner again 10 years later under guard and was basically under house arrest in Constantinople. Thereafter he was again exiled under guard to Adrianople, then last sent as a prisoner to the prison city of Akka. None of these exiles were by his choice or timing. In reference to his experiencing sickness, he was poisoned while he was in Adrianople in an attempt on his life. He was extremely ill and nearly died. Then, after being put in the prison city of Akka, he became quite ill there from poor food and foul water. He would be imprisoned, obviously from the above descriptions. He was put in an actual prison twice, but still, for nearly 40 years, he lacked freedom of movement. It was only in the last few years of his life that he was allowed to leave the prison city of Akka, and then only for a few miles outside of the city. He was not allowed to leave the area of Akka for the remainder of his life. As noted, some people, God's sheep, would help him, but obviously many people would not assist him. The goats, of course. Thus, the prophecy of Matthew chapter 25, verses 31 through 46 have been completely fulfilled by events in the life of Baha'u'llah, events not at all in his control. He was first a prisoner of the Persian government, then of the Ottoman Empire, for most of his life. That leaves us, at this point, with one big question to ponder. Are you a sheep or a goat, according to what Jesus said in these verses? You are in charge of how you will be judged by your behavior, of course. Since your original understanding about these verses in Matthew was that they were about the teachings of Jesus, about how we are to treat the poor and needy with mercy and compassion, you may be wondering, what does the new Messiah for this new era, Baha'u'llah, teach about how we should treat the poor and underprivileged? The next few slides will have some quotes from his writings on these topics. After this brief detour, I've got another Bible prophecy that the information we just reviewed will prove that Baha'u'llah has fulfilled that second prophecy too. This is a quote from Baha'u'llah's book titled Gleanings from the Writings of Baha'u'llah on page 285, which describes how Baha'u'llah's followers are to conduct their lives. Quote, "Be generous in prosperity and thankful in adversity. Be worthy of the trust of thy neighbor and look upon him with a bright and friendly face. Be a treasure to the poor, an admonisher to the rich, an answer to the cry of the needy, a preserver of the sanctity of thy pledge. Be fair in thy judgment and guarded in thy speech. Be unjust to no man, and show all meekness to all men. Be as a lamp unto them that walk in darkness, a joy to the sorrowful, a sea for the thirsty, a haven for the distressed, an upholder and defender of the victim of oppression. Let integrity and uprightness distinguish all thine acts. Be a home for the stranger, a balm to the suffering, a tower of strength for the fugitive. Be eyes to the blind, and a guiding light unto the feet of the erring. Be an ornament to the countenance of truth, a crown to the brow of fidelity, a pillar of the temple of righteousness, a breath of life to the body of mankind, an ensign of the hosts of justice, a luminary above the horizon of virtue, a dew to the soil of the human heart, an ark on the ocean of knowledge, a sun in the heaven of bounty, a gem on the diadem of wisdom, a shining light in the firmament of thy generation, a fruit upon the tree of humility." End of quote from the book Gleanings from the Writings of Baha'u'llah. And another quote from that same book, Gleanings from the Writings of Baha'u'llah, quote, "They who are possessed of riches, however, must have the utmost regard for the poor, for great is the honor destined by God for those poor who are steadfast in patience. By my life, there is no honor except what God may please to bestow that can compare to this honor. Great is the blessedness awaiting the poor that endure patiently and conceal their sufferings, and well is it with the rich who bestow their riches on the needy and prefer them before themselves." That's just a smidgen, a taste of Baha'u'llah's laws and guidance on how we humans are to behave if we want to be true to God's laws for this new era in the spiritual evolution of humankind. But now, back to that additional prophecy, a second prophecy among many, many others, that Baha'u'llah has fulfilled, as I mentioned before. Baha'u'llah has fulfilled all of the Bible prophecies of the coming of the Messiah of the latter days. Those that are not in complete fulfillment are in process of fulfillment, sparked by his appearance on this planet. But now we're going to review the second prophecy I told you about. This brief history of Baha'u'llah that we just reviewed using those maps also proves that these events in Micah chapter 7 verse 12 have also been fulfilled by Baha'u'llah. And don't worry, it's fairly short in length, just 10 slides. And this is the text of that prophecy in the book of Micah, quote, "In that day also he shall come even to thee from Assyria, and from the fortified cities, and from the fortress even to the river, and from sea to sea, and from mountain to mountain." End quote. I've put these 5 elements from the Micah prophecy into this chart. Next, I'll show you how Baha'u'llah has fulfilled all of these, and I'll enter that information in the right column for each prophecy element. Namely, that the Messiah of the latter days would come from Assyria, that he would travel from fortified or walled city to walled city, that he'd travel from a fortress to a river, he would also travel from sea to sea, and he'd travel from mountain to mountain. Here is that familiar map of the travels of Baha'u'llah as he was exiled as a prisoner from place to place. So, we'll start with that first element. Where's Assyria? Since Micah said that the Messiah would come from Assyria. Very roughly, I've superimposed the area of ancient Assyria in a green shade over the map of Baha'u'llah's travels as an exile and prisoner. You can see that Baghdad, where the yellow arrow is pointing, is in the area of ancient Assyria. Remember, Baghdad is where Baha'u'llah declared his station as the manifestation of God for this new era, meaning he announced he is the Messiah of the latter days and the 7th millennium in the area of Baghdad, ancient Assyria. Next, the prophecy that the Messiah would go from walled city to walled city. This was fulfilled when Baha'u'llah was first exiled to the walled city of Constantinople, now called Istanbul, if you recall. Then he was ultimately exiled. His last exile was to the prison city of Akka in Palestine, which is now Israel. Just for your information, Akka has also been known by several names shown in the inset box in the upper right corner, which includes the name Aker and Ptolemaeus. Ptolemaeus is from way back when the Ptolemaic Empire of Egypt ruled Palestine. And the city of Akka that I tend to refer to, because that's the name that prevailed in the time of Baha'u'llah, is now officially called Akko, Israel. Note that Napoleon Bonaparte tried to conquer Akka in the year 1799 in his bid to defeat the Muslim governor of that province, and ultimately to, supposedly, go on to conquer the Middle East. Napoleon failed his attempt at capturing Akka because of those fortified walls. Instead, he went back to France and became the self-proclaimed Emperor of France. This map is of the northern part of the Holy Land, currently Israel. Note the walled city or fortress of Akka at the top. It has a light blue arrow pointing to it. Around the year 1875, after almost 10 years within the walls of Akka, the governor of Akka finally allowed Baha'u'llah to leave the walled city, although he was not allowed to leave the general area of Akka and Haifa for the remainder of his life. In 1875, a garden on an island in the middle of the river Na'aman, the arrow is pointing to it, was rented for the use of Baha'u'llah to get him out of the city into the countryside. Therefore, Baha'u'llah traveled from the walled fortress of Akka to an island in the river, just as Micah foretold. So we can see that Baha'u'llah has fulfilled these 3 of the 5 elements of the prophecy in Micah. He came from Assyria, traveled from a fortified or walled city, Constantinople, to ultimately the prison city of Akka, also a walled city. And he traveled from the prison city of Akka to the nearby river of Naaman. Next, about the Messiah traveling from sea to sea. You may recall that when Baha'u'llah was exiled for the 2nd time from Baghdad to Constantinople, he, his family, and some others were boarded onto a steamer at Samsun on the Black Sea, that's noted at the top of this slide, to travel by ship to Constantinople across the Black Sea. Then, about 4 years, 4 months later, being exiled for the 4th and final time, Baha'u'llah, his family, and companions were again put onto a ship, this time at Gallipoli, to be taken across the Mediterranean Sea to Akka, the walled city in Palestine. You can see the path where they stopped several times until they arrived at Haifa, where they were removed from the ship and boarded onto a sailboat for the trip across Haifa Bay to the sea gate of Akka. Next element about the Messiah going from mountain to mountain. Remember from the abbreviated historical events in Baha'u'llah's life that he spent 2 years in solitary contemplation in the mountains of Suleymaniya on a mountain named Sargalu. See the yellow triangle to the right of the center of the map. That's the approximate location of that mountain. Then after several more forced exiles, he ended up in Akka. After 1875, having been allowed to leave the walled city, Baha'u'llah traveled to nearby Haifa, where he stood on Mount Carmel, the pink triangle near the center, to instruct his son and his followers on where to build the Shrine of the Bab on Mount Carmel, and where the world center of the future of the institutions of his faith, the Baha'i faith, should be located, and that's where they are now. Thus, for elements 4 and 5, that's row 4 and 5 here. Row 4, element 4, the Messiah did travel from sea to sea as foretold. Baha'u'llah, in his forced exiles, traveled from the Black Sea to the Mediterranean Sea. Row 5, or element 5, the Messiah would travel from mountain to mountain per Micah. Baha'u'llah spent 2 years in solitary contemplation on the mountain of Sargalu in Suleymaniya, then exiled to the Holy Land, where he spent time on Mount Carmel in his later years. To sum it all up, Micah chapter 7 verse 12 has been completely fulfilled by Baha'u'llah through the exiles forced upon him by first the government of Persia, then by the government of the Ottoman Empire. The next few slides will show you a couple important Baha'i sites in the Holy Land, which are important to the worldwide Baha'i community of about 6 million believers spread all over the globe. This photo is of the Shrine of the Bab's final resting place, located on the side of Mount Carmel in Haifa, Israel. And this is the Shrine of Baha'u'llah, his final resting place, located outside of Akka, or as otherwise known, Akko, Israel. Located on the side of Mount Carmel in Haifa is the world center of the worldwide Baha'i faith community. These buildings, circled in red on the slide, house the administrative functions of the Baha'i faith. And here's an invitation to you to watch all my other videos that explain how the Baha'u'llah, and their faith, the Baha'i faith, fulfill other Bible prophecies, hundreds of other Bible prophecies. To access my other videos, go to youtube.com. Then in the search box on that website, enter the name of my channel, which is, shown there on the slide, Integral Destiny 9. All one word, no spaces, and don't forget the number 9 at the end. Once you get to my channel page, you'll see the list of my videos to choose from. Not all the videos may be listed initially. You may have to expand the list by clicking on the Show More at the bottom of the screen. I'm going to review a couple of my videos just so that you're aware that they're there. Maybe it'll spark some interest. Now this video is a must-watch. It's titled Christ Has Returned. It explains in detail Bible time prophecies that tell when the Messiah of the latter days, the returned Christ, would appear. It is true that the Bible does not give the day or the hour of his appearance, but it does give the year of his coming in several locations. Some of my other videos include Every Eye Will See Him, in which I explain that the Bible tells us not to take this prophecy of the coming of the Messiah of the latter days literally, meaning the Messiah coming down from the sky on a literal cloud, but the new Messiah, Baha'u'llah, did come in clouds from heaven. Then there is the video Revelation Revealed, about the meaning of the book of Revelation in regards to the coming of the Messiah. Watch this to finally understand who 666 was, past tense. Then there's a two-parter video on two different interpretations of the book of Revelation's prophecies about the four horsemen of the apocalypse. Then the video titled The Prophecy of the Seventh Millennium is about the coming of the Messiah of the latter days based on Jewish mystical writings and the Bible. Then there's the 8-part explanation of the book of Daniel. There are many prophecies in the book of Daniel. That's why it takes 8 videos to explain it. Another video, The Golden Rule, It's the Law, explains how the famous Golden Rule is not just a rule, but it is a spiritual law of God, and it is found in all the major religions. Apart from my own videos, I recommend that you watch this professionally produced 30-minute video on the life of Baha'u'llah and the start of the Baha'i faith as an introduction. Its title is The Prisoner of Akka. To access this video, go to youtube.com and then go to the channel named Baha'i Vision that you see there on the bottom of the screen. And look for the video by the name The Prisoner of Akka. You may also be able to just enter the title The Prisoner of Akka into the YouTube search box. Then look for this exact title on the channel named Baha'i Vision in the list of videos that should appear in your search results. Now back to my videos on my channel, Integral Destiny 9. There's this video called Armageddon is Over. In it, you'll learn about when and where this literal battle of Armageddon occurred. That's past tense, meaning it has happened already, just as foretold in the Bible. Then you will learn about the spiritual Armageddon that still has the world in its grip. And then there is this video which I developed to answer some questions that some of the viewers have brought up. The questions that are answered in this video, conveniently titled Questions Answered, include: Is Baha'u'llah the Antichrist? The short answer is no, he is not. The 5 verses in the Bible mentioning Antichrist are explained in this video, and who the actual personified Antichrists were when the Bab and Baha'u'llah made their missions known. But what about Jesus is the only way? In other words, how can Baha'u'llah be equal to Jesus since Jesus is the only way? Just a hint to the question, is Jesus the only way? Well, yes and no. Watch the video to find out what I mean by that. The simple answer is, of course, the returned Christ Spirit is again going to be the only way when he makes his appearance. Same Spirit, same source, the one and only God. Then the comment question, Jesus is going to come down from heaven on a cloud. You may think, how did Baha'u'llah fulfill this prophecy? The video tells you. And also, that name Baha'u'llah is new. How can he be the returned Christ? That will be explained. And the last question that's answered, what does the 144,000 to be saved really mean? If you are new to my channel and videos, I do hope you will watch several, if not all of them. I do have one special tip for you if you watch any of the other videos. First, Bible prophecy is very complicated. Therefore, my videos are detailed and lengthy. If you lack time or attention span, just pick a video that seems interesting to you to start to watch. Watch 20 to 30 minutes of it. Note down the name of the video and the time marker where you left off. Then start again at that time marker the next time you have the energy and time to continue, and watch for another 20 to 30 minutes. For your information, you don't get any points for speed in watching the videos. Comprehension is the most important thing. The two websites you see highlighted in yellow can give you more information about the Baha'i Faith. These two websites are designed for people who are seeking information about the Baha'i Faith, its main figures, history, teachings, and the sacred and authoritative texts of the faith. Now, if you'd like to find a book that gives a good, interesting overview of the Baha'i Faith, its main figures, history, beliefs, and tells you about its followers, without being preachy or trying to convert you, this is the book for you. Its title is Baha'u'llah and the New Era by author J.E. Esselmont. It is available through Amazon.com and probably the other online book vendors too. And it may even be in your local library for free. I do recommend it. Thank you for watching. This production is not an official production of the Baha'i Faith community. It was written, produced, and narrated by me alone. If there are any errors, they are mine alone. Contact me at that email address that you see there if you have any questions. All copyright protections are claimed. Do not change any information, slides, diagrams, or narration without my permission. And please do not charge a fee to anyone for viewing this video or any part of it. I don't make any money from these videos. I consider this a service and a gift to my fellow humans. Bye.